webinar, Navigating Change, Best Practices for Shifting to a Skills-Based Organization. I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have any questions or technical concerns, please use the Q&A module on your screen. You can resize and minimize the different modules on your screen by using the options in the top right corner of each module. This event is being recorded and can be watched later on demand using the same link. Attendees will also receive the recording of today's event. Look for that email within 24 hours post-event. We encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A module throughout the event for our speaker to address. You can also use the reaction module in the menu at the bottom to relay items you may like or want to express an emotion to. And now I will pass the stage to Kathy Endres, PhD, SVP Research and Global Industry Analyst, The Josh Bersin Company.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome everybody to our webinar on navigating change. And I'm your host for today, Kathy Endres, SVP Research and Global Industry Analyst at the Josh Bersin Company, joining you today from Palo Alto, California. And I'm joined today by Andrea Shaya, who is the Head of Talent Strategy and Transformation at Eightfold. Without further ado, I'll jump right into our agenda. And please put your questions in and put your emotions in. I also love all of these emojis when we have them come up, the hearts and the smiley faces and the thumbs up and all of that. So do that too, and we'll want to make this very interactive. So what we want to talk today is first talk a little bit about why change management is more important than ever today, and also how it's changing and how change management is changing in today's business environment. Then I'll share with you from our research. We actually did a very big research study on 10 lessons of change agility. And then I'll hand it over to Andrea, who's going to talk more operationally on how we can operationalize change agility. And please put your questions in and we'll answer them as we go along and also in the end. So that's our agenda for today. So let's start with why the case for change management. And thank you for all the thumbs ups and all the hearts. I love that. This is a great quote. I always like to start with that. Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, said, "Change has never been this fast and it will never be this slow ever again." And it's true when you think about either both your personal life, your professional life, organizational change, AI, everything that's happening in like coming out of a 3-year pandemic and beyond. I know we don't even want to talk about that anymore. But basically, change is getting faster and faster, and that requires us to think about change management and change agility in a different way. On the business side, let's talk about that for a little bit. This comes from a study from PwC where they surveyed thousands of CEOs around the world, and 40% of these CEOs said they don't even believe their company will exist in 10 years. 40%. So that's a lot of companies. A lot of companies also, if you think about how long companies pursue, it gets shorter and shorter. The average lifespan of a company is now 15 years versus when you think about the time we're working in organizations, it gets longer and longer. Some people work in companies 50 years, 60 years even, because we live longer and we're healthier and we want to contribute more to the society and to our organizations and to our careers. So that's changing a lot of stuff, of course. CEOs also want to focus more on transformation, not just execution, but most of them actually can't really do that. So on the business side, change and transformation is really critical and really a business imperative for CEOs around the world. Now, on the labor market side, and you know all of this, I'm not telling you anything new here, I think, but on the labor market side, labor market around the world, and I see a lot of people are joining us from around the world, which is great. It's very hard to hire. Labor market is getting harder and harder to basically navigate as an employer. Employee retention, of course, is very low. Engagement keeps declining around the world. People are stressed out. People are not well. Every company is struggling with how to design hybrid work. Inflation is driving up demands for your salaries, of course. And in the middle of all of that is the call for skills, for technical skills, for leadership skills, for frontline operational skills. And we talk a lot about the skill-based organization today as well. But all of this is impacting you in organizations too. How do you respond as an organization to all of this change in the labor market? And then on the maybe both the employee side, the business side, and also the HR side, something else is going on. Every industry is transforming with another industry. Every industry is converging with another industry. If you think maybe 10, 15 years ago, you were in these clean, like neat industries where you said, we're a CPG company, we do CPG. But now, for example, and we just published a big study on that, CPG companies are also becoming retail companies. Every company, of course, is becoming tech companies. Walmart is going into healthcare, for example, and companies are going into, every company is going, lots of companies are going into banking, and media and tech companies are becoming streaming companies, and all the auto companies, of course, are becoming electric vehicle companies. And what does it mean for your skills and for your business models and for your operating models? Well, we need to think about, as organizations, we need to think about attracting and retaining and inspiring new skills, but then also from an individual side, the skills that we had and we've built maybe over our career are changing rapidly too. So change is everywhere, and change is coming faster than ever before. And how do we respond to all of this? So with that, I want to go for our first poll. So here's our first poll. We want to hear from you now. How important is change and transformation to your company? Is it critically important? Is it something that the C-suite is really important, really paying attention to? Is it very important? Is HR and leadership and maybe other functions paying attention to that? Is it kind of important? It's an HR priority. Is it somewhat important and a priority for some parts of HR? Or is it not important at all? Or something else? I don't know what the something else would be, but basically just tell us how important change and transformation is for your organization. And if you put your votes in, I think what we'll do then is we'll just move to the next slide, is then when we can see, hopefully, the results. So I think hopefully everybody has put in their votes. Let's see what we came up for. Oh yeah, that's great. Okay, well, this is interesting. So 44% of you say actually it's critically important, it's a C-suite priority, and I'm really glad to hear that. And the next highest one is 40% said it's very important, it's a high priority for leadership, HR, and other functions. And only, let me just see that, only 1% say it's not important at all. So it's really, really important. And what we feel too, and we just came from our big conference that we had in Los Angeles at USC, where we had 450 business leaders and HR leaders join us. And change, transformation, culture was one of the big themes that came up in every conversation, whether we talked about skills, whether we talked about talent acquisition, or we talked about pay equity, reward systems, or learning. Any of these topics actually circle back to change and transformation, because if we're putting in transformational solutions, or thinking about different ways of working, different ways of providing employee solution, of course, we need to be good at change and transformation. So let me tell you a little bit about a big study that we did a couple of years ago in the beginning of the pandemic. So what we did there is we studied 1,400 organizations around the globe and their response practices to the pandemic. That was kind of early on in the pandemic, maybe a half a year in. And of course, we didn't know how long it was going to go. And we studied different practices, but we didn't just study practices that were associated with pandemic responses. We didn't just ask them about masks or like distancing and all of that. But we asked different questions too, higher level questions about reinventing how people work, redesigning performance management, thinking about bringing in contract resources fairly quickly, for example, paying for transformation, fostering transformation and change skills. So what we realized then when we finished this study, and you see our maturity model here, is this was not just a maturity model for pandemic responses, it's really a maturity model for what we call business resilience. And business resilience, of course, isn't just a defensive mechanism where you like mitigate risks that your company might come to, but at the heart of it is all about people. So this is what we came up with in this maturity model, that we saw that 18% of companies, they go through stages basically, and you build this transformation muscle up over years. Those that were really good at change and transformation really built this transformation muscle up over many years. So what we found out here is that 18% of companies kind of at what we call hope for the best. So they wish that the pandemic would go away. They wish that people basically that it was just not going to happen, or not going to have such a big impact. They just basically close your eyes, right, and close your ears, and just basically focus on cost control, reduce the risks. These might be companies and the pandemic, and also we see this now too, maybe in the maybe economic downturn that we have in the U.S. and other places. Those are companies that very quickly do kind of mass layoffs, for example, big reductions in force, because they're just trying to be defensive of it. And that's not really a good way of approaching change and transformation. Level 2 companies, those are the companies, we call them care for the people. They made sure in the pandemic that people were protected, but also today they focus, for example, on supporting people in their well-being. They realize people are stressed out. They provide them with programs for care, and that's really great. And by the way, 46% of organizations are at this level. So most organizations, chances are most of you are going to be in this level 2 of this like kind of journey to transforming and reinventing. And caring for people is great, but it's not enough. So level 3 companies also drive, in addition to all of that, they drive agility, they drive the culture, they focus on the mission, and they educate employees and leaders how to deal with change. Level 4 organizations take it a step further, and only 1 in 5 organizations is there, by the way. They take it a step further. They don't just deal with the change, but they also use change as kind of a springboard to reinvent all of their offering, their business practices, their business models, all of their talent practices, and their approaches to their business. And they are the companies that built this transformation muscle over many years. They didn't just respond to the pandemic or any change really based on like it wasn't just an initial response mechanism, but they really built this transformation muscle up over many years. So with that, with all of this, we want to hear from you in the next poll. So which level of business resilience is your company at? Are you a level 1 company that just like wishes the problem, whatever the problem is, whatever the business disruption is, would go away, and just hope for it to basically pass and go away? A level 2 company, are you one of those companies that's very nice, that's caring for your people, but not with a lot of business focus around it? Are you a level 3 companies that drive agility and culture, and really focus also on the mission of the company and the vision of the company, or a level 4 company? Are you transforming and reinventing and using any disruption to really rethink your business models, your people practices, your talent practices, all of that, and have this kind of transformation muscle to also sense and respond to what's coming in the industry and what's coming like your way? So I see about a third of you have put your answers in. Put your answers in. Now we're at 40%, and I love seeing this go up. And in the meantime, maybe I'll look at some of the questions that you have in there. If we use AI, how can we avoid copyright infringement and use for HR purposes? A very specific question here. We'll maybe respond to some of these as we go along. But put your questions in there as well, and put also your answers in here as we tally up all of these responses. I think I'll keep moving on this and see what you came up with. Okay, so pretty sophisticated audience, better than what we saw in our big study. Not surprising maybe, because you're all interested in change and transformation. So that shows me that you're in organizations that really pay attention to that. So 9% of companies here we have in level 1 wishing the problem away. Level 2, about 30% care for the people, 45% in drive, agility, and culture, and that's great, and 16% in transform and reinvent. So interesting mix that we have here in this audience. So let's keep going. Why does it matter? Why does change in business resilience really matter? Well, this is also from our big study that we had on the business resilience that I just talked about. And it really matters a lot. It's not just a nice to have, it's really a business imperative. It doesn't just impact, of course, your ability to effectively respond to change, as we see here. Those organizations, those level 4 organizations, are 4.5 times more likely to respond effectively to change, which you would expect probably that they're much more likely to respond to change and also to positively impact society. But they're also 3.9 times more likely to be financially high performing. So although you're not directly impacting like your bottom line, your growth, your business, like you're not selling things or something like that, and you're also almost 4 times more likely to satisfy and retain customers, and 4.5 times more likely to outperform the competition when you focus on all of these practices. And I know I didn't go very deep in these practices. I'll come to them in a minute, but I just wanted to give you the case on why all of this matters a lot. And just to put all of this in perspective, when we looked into many different practices that we study at the Josh Bersin Company, we do these maturity models and these studies for many different areas, including talent acquisition, learning and development, employee experience, rewards and recognition, DI, org design, and on and on and on. Business resilience was actually that study, that their transformation muscle, the change agility muscle, actually had the highest impact on financial outcomes. This 3.9 times more likely to be financially high performance happens to be the highest multiplier of all of them. If you see all these other multipliers for all these other areas here. And what that tells me is that although of course you need to hire great people, and of course you need to grow great people and develop the skill sets and design a good organizations and a great experience around all of this, what really, really matters most is if your organizations can adapt effectively to all the changes. Because if you are change agile, if you're business resilient as an organization and your people are agile to changes, you don't just hire people for today, but you also help them develop for tomorrow. You develop the skill sets. You're better at adjusting to AI, for example. You're better at adjusting to new skills requirements and the transformations that are going on in the workplace overall. So really, really important to have that kind of transformation muscle in that. Okay, so let's keep going on this. From an HR capability perspective, it matters a lot too. So if HR, and this is from our global HR capability study, where we studied over 8,000 individuals and their specific capabilities in all 95 capabilities in HR. And you see the top 15 here on the slide as they relate to organizational growth. So you see that having change management and communication skills as HR organization is actually the second most impactful capability overall for HR people, just right after developing leaders and managers as it relates to organizational and financial growth. So high growth organizations are much more likely to have a lot of people that are really good in HR and beyond, that are really good at managing change and communications. And how do you build these skills, of course, in HR? Well, one way to build these skills is we have, at the Josh Bersin Academy, we have a capability model, and we have programs around change management and communication to really help you hone these skills. And I'll share some of these skills. Our Managing Change and Change Agility course program at the Josh Bersin Academy is actually one of our highest rated, most in-demand course of all. So managing change, really, really important also from an organizational perspective. Okay, so now here comes the point where we want to talk about how does all of this impact how we manage change overall. And is change really something that can be managed? We talked about a lot about how all of the environment is changing so much. The labor market is changing, the business environment is changing. Of these CEOs say they won't even be in business anymore if they don't transform their company. We feel change is actually not something that can be managed as a project anymore. Change management has got to stop to be kind of a sibling of program management or project management. It has to be a design discipline that puts people first and builds that agility and that capability of people to respond to change and to anticipate change, and that puts people in the driver's seat, that bottom up kind of human-centered change process. So that's really what we saw when we studied change management. And of course, there's many, many different methods and approaches for change management out there. You might have your Carter model, or you might have your ATCA model, or any of these other models. All of them are great, but not all of them kind of anticipate and deal with the nature that change is not something that you can kind of unfreeze, then like go through the change and refreeze, because while you're doing that, all of these other things are changing in the environment too. If you think about the last few years, every day something changes in the environment, whether it was the pandemic and the pandemic going up and down, or whether that's a war in Ukraine, or whether that's inflation being really high, and then the great resignation that you had in many countries and many companies going on, and then the quiet quitting that we talked about. All of these are in your personal life, of course, dealing with inflation or dealing with maybe layoffs of your friends, or maybe your own layoffs, lots and lots of change going on. So people can't just focus on your one big thing that you want to help them change on. You really have to help them be more change agile and more adaptable as basically they navigate all of this change. And as organizations, we can do that. We can actually help people be more change agile. And what we identified, and I'll go to this now next, we identified 10 lessons or 10 ways of actually doing this, of not seeing change management as kind of a one-time thing that you just basically gear up for it and then like go through it and then follow that plan and then you're done with it, but makes it a constant, makes it an iterative kind of change approach. So that's kind of what we mean when we say no more change management, but change agility. So let me go now to the 10 lessons that we have on change agility. Okay, so we have them all on one page, and I'll talk about all of them in a little bit, and then I want to hear from you which one is most impactful, and maybe that's going to help us gear maybe the top one, or two, or three as we have time to do this. Okay, so let me go through this in a nutshell. So the first thing that we say here is every interaction is a change interaction. And the reason why we say that is when you think about change not as a discrete kind of activity or a project, but about something that's like iterative and ongoing, every interaction that we have with your users or with leaders in your company, see it as a change interaction. Don't save it for last when you're already done designing everything, whether you're designing a system, whether you're rolling out kind of a new approach to whatever process you might have. Think about every interaction as a change interaction. Starbucks, for example, we heard a great example of how Starbucks transformed their entire recruiting process at the Eightfold conference that was just like a few weeks ago. They redesigned their entire frontline hiring process, and they saw every interaction as a change interaction. So they brought hiring managers along in even system selection, and then how they designed the system, and they brought in also the people, the candidates for their store hiring to get their input very early on, and not just at the end. So thinking about every interaction as a change interaction, not just like basically dealing with change in the end. That's the first one.
Kathy, on that example, what I loved of what you're describing that they've done is they've actually reinforced their culture, right?
Absolutely.
As they've brought in
I
these
love that.
individuals to shape it. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It actually gets me to maybe the next one and the third one, really. But I'll talk about the second one. Second one is effective change starting with listening to employees. And listen, not just telling employees. I think a lot of times when we think about change management, we think about telling employees something, right? We think about communication, and communication is important. But before we talk, can we listen to them? Can we get their input? Can we see what actually matters to them, and what are their perceptions of whatever change we're going to? And listening to employees really takes you from this like know it all to a like learn it all, and learn where are the concerns of your employees. And listening all the time. And of course, you all have employee service, but then also having this bi-directional interaction with employees as well. So that's the second one of listening to employees. And the third one actually gets me to what you just said, Andrea. Starting a mission first movement, not a marketing campaign. And the reason why we framed it like this is putting the mission first and really reinforcing the culture, for example, of Starbucks, as we talked about, is critically important. Because when you tell people not just the what of the change, but then also the why, and tie it into what the organization is here to do, then everything changes. A great example I have here is the Lego Group, who designed their leadership programs with employees at the center of it. So they had actually 15 employees design their new leadership model with their mission as the framework. Basically, they said, what are we here to do? We're here to do, like, play is really important, of course, for Lego, and we all love Legos. And what they did is they said, we want to energize everybody everywhere so they can be like children and basically every day play and experience their work. So tying it into the mission of the organization, not just marketing it and telling people basically, here's what you need to do. So that's the number 3. Number 4 is leadership. Of course, in any change process, even in bottom-up kind of employee-centric change process, leadership is critically important. And a lot of times in traditional change management, we use leaders kind of as speaking horns. So here's the talking points. Can you just tell your employees this is what you need to do? But they can have a much bigger impact if they don't just talk, but then also model the change. So really thinking about how can you use leaders and leverage leaders to model the change with humans at the center by walking the walk, not just talking the talk. So that's number 4. Communication, I already talked a little bit about communication. We call that transparent, fit for purpose communication sets the tone. So think about when you communicate, not just what you communicate, but then also how you communicate, which medium is most impactful for your employees. When you think about the Starbucks example, for example, when you think about your candidates in the stores, they don't read emails, right? They're probably more text-based, right? And maybe your managers, maybe they read emails, right? So think about how you use, also what medium you use and what format you use and what you tell people, how quickly they consume it, because they have a million other things going on as well. So that's the communication. The 6th one is about design thinking. So including employees and leaders or whoever is going to be the consumer and the person that eventually has to act on your change. In the Starbucks example, of course, it was also recruiters, but in any of these changes, using design thinking for any of these changes, because it builds the right solution. It's going to be much easier to sell that solution when you design it the right way. Deutsche Telekom, for example, they have been doing design thinking for 10 years, and they started with one pilot in the HR area of design thinking, and now they do design thinking for everything, not just for tech stuff. They do it even for example, they told us a story that they use design thinking to design executive compensation kind of options for their executives in Germany. Do people want a company car, or do they want like something else, basically? So they are really using design thinking even for those things that are not even tech solutions. And design thinking is kind of this great way of empathizing with your users and really making sure that you design things right in the first place. And that goes also when you think about design thinking. A big principle of design thinking is not doing one big change, but doing many little iterations and what we call micro changes. Think about, for example, when you want to get fit or you want to lose weight, you don't think about like the, I don't know, 20 pounds you want to lose. Maybe you think about the 20 miles you want to run. You think about, well, how can I break it down into smaller pieces? How can I run just like a couple of miles today, maybe? So I eventually work up for that. And that's the same with change. When you think about the big change, it can be so big and overwhelming. But when you break it down into big little pieces, it gets much easier. And so basically breaking that up and thinking about how the small also behavior changes break up to big change. And that goes with the eighth one, where we talk about nudge technology. So technology, of course, for change management, a lot of times is just project management solutions, right? You say, well, we want to track our communication, we want to track our training, we want to track our stakeholder management, and that's all great. But think about also, how can you nudge people along and make the right thing easy to do? How can you change behaviors along the way and give people these nudges to help them incorporate changes into their flow of work and just basically behave differently? A great example here is PwC, for example. They were trying to accomplish more human-centered and inclusive leadership behaviors, and they used a technology named Cultivate, which basically is now owned by Perceptics. But they basically, what they did is it looked at all their behaviors of their managers and how they communicated with their team members. And then it gave them suggestions as they were going into a team meeting to, for example, say, hey, whenever you meet with this person, you don't let them talk so much. So maybe you can actually ask some more questions and help them open up, so you're being more inclusive to them. A great example to use technology in different ways for that as well. Rewards and recognition, of course, critically important for when people change their behaviors. Highlighting, modeling, storytelling, telling people what good looks like. We talk a lot about the skill-based organization, and that's hard for people, like talent mobility, for example. But highlighting managers who let people maybe work on projects, have people that can work on different teams. It's a hard change to do, but it's much easier when people see from their peers on why it matters and what good looks like. And then the last one is, and I've already talked a little bit about that, HR capabilities for change and agility and communication is really, really critical. 40% of, it's the most required or most requested actually capability in our HR capability model from the thousands of HR people that we have and supporting here at the Josh Business Academy. But yet, only one in five practitioners is actually really good at that. So lots of upward opportunity on that as well. So with that, let me go to our next poll and see which of these 10 lessons, basically, or 10 practices you feel is most impactful for your company. And we have them all here. I'm not going to read them all through, but maybe as you go through your read through and think which one is most impactful, and maybe you want to say all of them, but just pick one of them. And we want to drive a choice here, and we want to see basically what you think about change. Andrea, as you were thinking through that and as we were talking, anyone that stood out to you most?
I mean, I just think this is invaluable. Kathy, everything that's on this list is so critical, and to have it all in one place on one page is just invaluable. When I look at this, though, I do think the effective change, listening to employees, is important, because they're the stakeholders who you're trying to really have adopt the change, and so stepping into their shoes is really vitally critical. And if you try to create a strategy centrally and not talk to these stakeholders, your chances of success I think are really low.
No, it's so true. It's so true. And I think, for example, as we are a lot of times talking about the skill-based organization, for example, what does it really mean for employees, and how far are they on the journey, and what's getting in the way, and how do they even understand what we're talking about? And maybe it's a big concern, and maybe it's not a concern for them at all, but we won't know if we don't listen to them, if we don't ask them what the problem really is. Exactly right.
Yeah, I could probably pick 5 more, but I'll just stop there. These are all great.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and we have we can also share maybe with the attendees, we have actually a playbook, like a book where we've written about each of them. Of course, I went through them pretty quickly because I know we only have a little bit of time. We could talk about each of them, I think, for an hour, right? Each of them could be an hour-long conversation at least, but we can share the playbook afterwards too. Okay, I see about 40% of you have put your vote in. Do put your vote in because we want to see what's most impactful for you, and then we can it would also be very interesting. We've done this poll a few times actually on a few occasions, and I'd be really curious which one rises to the top for you. Okay, I think we have the results in. So let me see. Effective change starts with listening to employees. I love it. So that was the one that also you called out, Andrea, is great. 21%. Foster human-centered leadership to inspire change and transformation, 18%. And I think these were the top two, the top runners, of course. And each of them got some votes, which is great. I know the nudge technology probably has least of them because it's a little bit ambiguous what that even is. But yeah, each of them had some things. So should we've talked about each of them, I think, in a little bit. Effective change starts with listening and employees. Maybe we'll go to, let's go maybe to I know we had a lot of slides, and I thought we might actually go to our next, the change and transformation. We talked about that, right? I just talked about that, why this is so important, but how little organizations actually have adopted change and transformation behaviors and these new like change agility behaviors as well. Well, I think we have another poll that we wanted to come before Andrea, will hear from you on how we can actually operationalize all of that. Now we talked very high level, right, about change and transformation and capabilities and thinking about change management in a different way. Now we want to hear from you. What's getting in the way in terms of change adoption in your organization? What's the biggest obstacle? And maybe, again, you want to say all of them when you look at all of these. But if you just have to pick the most important one, the most impactful one, what's your most impactful or most important obstacle to change adoption, or the biggest obstacle? Is it there's not a clear vision on where the change is even going? Like, do employees not know what's the reason for it? Why we're doing this, how we're doing this change? Is the lack of leadership support for the change? Is it something that we are maybe just pushing for in HR, but no leader has put their name behind it, no executive has put their stamp behind it? Or do you not have enough tools to monitor the change, if the change is happening? Or is there just too much going on at the same time, and that's why people are just overwhelmed and overburdened? Or is there not a lot of context for the change? Do people not understand what's surrounding the change? Or is there something else? So we see now all of your votes coming in. I see 40% of you have submitted it, which is great. But put your vote in, and Andrea, what do you see as most frequently when you talk with customers or organizations as the biggest obstacle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the I would probably put it, one of the things, something else that ties back to what you were saying actually in the prior priorities, is really kind of sustaining the efforts around the change, because it's not something that just will happen overnight. And so if you do a set of activities and then you walk away, the chances of that change taking hold are not really strong. So I think that's usually kind of where I see some of the hiccups coming.
Yeah, like it's a one-time shot, right? You say, oh, thank God we're done with it now, but you're never done. Like all of these big transformational things, you're never done with them. You're never like, I heard somebody, we were talking with somebody who was talking about pay equity, and they said, we're done with pay equity in our organization. I'm like, how can you ever be done with it? Like, it's like, are we done with financial performance or with like customer satisfaction? Of course, it's always a work in progress. That's exactly right.
That's
And I
right.
love that. I think that's really it's really clear. Okay, well let's go to the results of that. So what we see here, okay, lack of clarity for what, why, and how of the change. Okay, now that, and too much going on at the same time. Well, that was the thing that we talked about, like for the last half hour, 40 minutes, is why do we need change agility, not just change management? Because change is constant, it changes on top of each other, and everything is changing all the time. In your company, but then also outside of your company and in people's personal lives and professional lives, and all like communities and society overall. So too much going on at the same time. And you can't really change that, right? So you can change how you support people in being more change agile. So great results here. Now, Andrea, do you want to take us away and tell us a little bit about how you operationalize that change agility and how you help people at the ground basically make it happen?
Yeah. So I think, oh, let me just see. Are we, sorry. Yeah, here we are. So I think, Kathy, I just think that that's an invaluable set of information you just put together. And all I'm going to be doing is repeating it, but from the standpoint of an actual implementation, right? And so really talking about, how do you successfully manage change and engagement if you're rolling out new AI or technology, right? And all kind of the kind of factors and important things that Kathy just shared kind of all feed into this, right? So for successful change, when you think about your stakeholders, you need to really have the inspiration, right? And so that was your example just now around setting the context, and the explaining the vision is really around like, why is this really important, and inspiring your stakeholders or your employees to really understand that and really buy into it is, I think, really important. Then it's really around the set of actions, right, that they need to take to really support that, or kind of drive the objectives around the change. And so that's really kind of the how, like, okay, why should I do this, and how do I do this? And those are the two things that come together to get at the change. And then, so when you dive into the details of this, there's really kind of 4 elements of activities. And again, this ties back to a lot of what you talked about, Kathy. The readiness, really understanding what's the impact of the stakeholders. And is this a big change? Is this a little change? What are the pain points behind it? And how are you going to make sure that things are in good shape in terms of communicating and enabling this change? Then there's the communication, right? That was one of the top ranked priorities, and just really establishing clear communications, make sure all the impacted stakeholders understand what's happening, and communicating the context, and setting the inspirations, and also explain the hows. And then the training really starts to tackle a lot of the how question, right? Making sure it's very simple and very clear on what new actions do I need to take. So I think all of us can identify anytime there's a new employee tool rolled out. All of us has figured out, okay, here are the steps I take to get something done, whether it's if I want to apply for a job internally, or if I want to, submit my expenses. I know exactly what steps to do. But now if you change the platform, it's like, oh no, now what do I do? So you have to have very clear training instructions to help people understand how to adopt. And then really importantly, as you spoke about, Kathy, it's just the continuity of really kind of monitoring, like, how is this going? What is happening with adoption? Because in my experience of implementation of new technology, it happens in an uneven level, the adoption. And so understanding what's happening and understanding where you need to place more effort, I think, is really important to be successful. So these are kind of the 4 elements of change. On the next page, what I'd highlight is, you're going to go through different stages of change. And the point is that these will play a different role in each each of the stages. As a matter of fact, on the next page, what you can see is some of the specific activities. So you can see readiness, as you're preparing for the changes, vitally important. Understanding the stakeholders and starting to draft, like, how is your communication going to connect with the stakeholder experience? Then when you kind of roll it out, you're rolling out your communication, you're rolling out your training, and you're starting to monitor what's happening. And then, as we've said, and Kathy, as you've said, kind of continuing the activities post the rollout is important. So continuing the communication, for me, as an example, one of the things you would do is just look at where the adoption is happening really quickly, and how are individuals using the tool, and why is it resonating for them. You can take that back into your communication and feature that, right, to all the other employees to kind of get them excited or understand more, or set the expectation that this is now kind of how things are going to work. The training, understanding where you've got opportunity areas still, and really supporting the additional training. And then monitoring. I think you should always be monitoring what is the usage, is the nature of the usage of the new tool aligned with your objectives. So you can see how all these pieces play an important role as you get through implementation. And it's not just preparing for launch and then walking away, because that will not be successful. As a matter of fact, I think that is one of the biggest watch outs as we worked with customers, is not sustaining and monitoring that change is really, really vital. Okay. And then I think the one thing I wanted to highlight, this is something that's really important to Eightfold. And as you're considering vendors, that you're talking to for new technology or AI, what's really important that you've got a commitment around how are your stakeholders, what kind of support will your stakeholders who are going to be using the tool have to make sure they're comfortable and they understand exactly how they should be using the tool. I think that's one thing Eightfold is very much committed to. That's really important. And just highlighting that is really important. Now, the rest of it, with regards to the culture, the vision, the aspiration, I think the organization needs to shape that. I think the vendors, or I know Eightfold does a lot in terms of advising, because we have so much experience working with over 100 of our customers, that's really important to bring to the table. But from the standpoint of product utilization, I just want to dive into that for a couple of minutes really quickly, because I think this is really important. The key areas of kind of tools that you should be looking for are obviously training materials, user quick reference guides, very simply, step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Here's how you do this. Kind of the adoption dashboards, and I'll share some of those with you. And then for us is also connecting with our community of customers, right? One of the best ways for you to learn on how things are going and how to address issues is to connect with other individuals that are in the same place, in the same boat, or might have more experience. So these are kind of the 3 categories of things that we really focus on. On dashboards, right? Here's an example. As I said, the adoption is going to be really bumpy, and really understanding what's happening, where the gaps are in terms of usage, are going to be important for you to get everything to the right place you want it to be. So for us, for example, in talent acquisition with recruiters, it's just really understanding, like, what is the use of the tool? What is the rate of adoption that's happening? And what is, for us, what was really important is calibration. Like, are people really leveraging the intelligence that we're providing them, in their recruiting activities? And so that's something that we also monitor closely.
What I love about this one, Andrea, just wanted to make one comment about the dashboards and the calibration dashboards. I think this is another way of listening to employees, right? Because you listen to how they act, not just what they say. Because when you identify, for example, there's a group of recruiters, maybe they are not using the tool not enough. What's behind that? So then you can really troubleshoot and say, well, this group of people, maybe they don't understand how to use it. Maybe they don't realize it's even there, right? So it's another way. Listening doesn't just have to be a survey. This is listening to the actions that people take, which is, it ties back to what you all voted as one of the most important things in change, is listening to people.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, for me, having implemented this, I was able to identify individuals who figured out how to use the tool beyond what I was even thinking about.
Absolutely.
right?
That's great.
And
Yeah.
so all of a sudden understanding like, hey, what are you doing and how are you doing that, and bringing that back to the rest of the users is quite powerful. Very
No,
powerful.
absolutely. Yeah, I love that, right? And then you could use them as the super users and kind of training and communicating to others. And it helps you with then modeling and rewarding and recognizing the right behaviors, which we also talked about. So this all ties back together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that point too of having somebody as a peer set become a resource for you is
Yeah.
really a great thing. So being able to create that, and a lot of that, believe it or not, can come from your dashboard if you're talking about a large organization and really understanding like what's this person doing, because they're doing a lot in here.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
and then just an example for us on even mobility, just understanding, are your employees completing their profiles? Are they setting up goals for their career using the intelligence? Are they looking at jobs? Are they applying to jobs now that they have the intelligence to do that? And then just continuing with that, just making sure are they signing up for learning? Are they planning their careers? Are they working with other individuals? These are all things that can be monitored and tell you what is the extent of the use of your tool. And I think that's important. It's not just one metric on like, is somebody using it? It's how are they using it? And that will continue to inform, where your opportunities areas are and where else you can dial up. And then, as I said, the training becomes important. Obviously, direct training, train the trainers, and then the availability of these training tools for the different stakeholders involved in using the tool is important. What I'd say is also important is the quick reference guides, right? So, having a very simple way of understanding step 1, 2, and 3 on how do I do this is so helpful and so easy, right? So just having this available, I think, is really important. Like, so if you're used to submitting your expenses a certain way, and now there's a new platform, a whole different way, if someone gave you, here's the 5 steps to take, you'll be adopting that and understanding how to use that tool pretty readily. So I think these are also very important tools to have. And then, as I said, kind of the community, right? I think that's really important. Connecting people, and people have a lot of appetite to connect with other leaders or other stakeholders. So this is something we think is really important to have in place too, for people to really understand and deal with their challenges or what's going really well for them to share with others. So I think that's all I had. I think we have just a little bit of time, maybe 5 minutes, to see if there's any questions. Let's see. We have a couple questions here about receiving the slides, and I believe that's going to be distributed. Is that right?
People will get the recording, I think, afterwards.
Recording.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Other questions? We'd love more questions on anything that we said, or comments, or anything that resonated or didn't resonate. It sounds like people are interested in both the overarching change and agility kind of approach, but then also the practical and operational elements of change agility. But any questions, any additional questions on how to go about this? Comments. Well, maybe we'll look at the comments too.
I'm reading. There's one question here. Well, one, hello to Alex, who sends his greetings from Chennai. That's nice, from India, far away, and very early hours too. Thanks for joining. We've got another question here. I'm not sure I understand the question, Kathy. It's, if we use AI, how can we avoid copyright infringement and use for HR purposes?
Yes, I looked at that too. I'm not exactly sure what that means. How can we avoid Can you share more about the nudge technology? This one, I can definitely share more about nudge technology. So nudge technology, those are technologies that give people basically, based on their behaviors, nudges. And nudges could be emails, it could be insights on how to behave differently. So for example, when we're talking also, Andrea, about using a new recruiting system, for example, right? It could be using, as Andrea just showed, giving people these nudges to say, hey, here's new candidates, and here's a way basically to look at the candidates in like using the AI to sort them, or like using those kind of insights that you get from the new system that you didn't have before. And nudging, all it means is basically not just training people, but telling them in the moment, here's what you should do. So encouraging people to use this, the new technology, or use a new process or new behavior in a different way. The example I gave about nudge technology was one that basically another nudge technology that we have is, if you know Microsoft Viva, if you use Microsoft Viva, we use it. And the Viva gives you, for example, it gives you nudges to maybe take a break or take some focus time. All of these are kind of nudges that encourage you to do different behaviors. Andrea, any other thoughts on nudge technology?
No, I mean, I think it's great technology, right? Because as you said, it's at the right point in time. There's
Right.
kind of a prompt to take the right action. I see a question here that I think is a great question about any specific industries that are adopting the eightfold technology at a higher rate than others. And Kathy, I know you can participate in this too, because we partner a lot on analytics and insights across industries. But it's kind of amazing to me that the applicability of talent intelligence, skills intelligence across all kind of talent needs is growing for every industry, right? And I think, as an example, I mean, we have customers across every industry, financial services, pharmaceuticals, hospital and healthcare, manufacturing, semiconductor. I mean, just the range is incredible. Telecom. I mean, it's pretty much every industry. And I think what's driving this is that there's competition for skills that's really heavy across every industry. You know, obviously digital skills impacts many industries, but even outside of that, you know, each industry has their own, you know, transformation that's happening about unique skill needs that they have. So, Kathy, I think you shed a lot of insights to analysis on this, but biotech, right, for pharmaceuticals, 5G for telecom, renewable energy for energy. There's just so much transformation happening across every industry. It's a really interesting time to be in talent right now. And so as a result of that pressure, we're seeing adoption happening across pretty much every industry. Anything to add to that, Kathy?
No, I totally agree with that, Andrea. I mean, I was surprised because when we looked at which industries are seeing skills disruptions, but then also how they're using technology, including eightfold in a new way. We think healthcare would be one that's kind of hanging behind, but we've seen, for example, healthcare, when we studied this, to be actually at the forefront of some of these disruptions, because they have to be, right? Because they're short people so much, they're short clinical people so much. And I think that's why it applies to every industry, because every industry, I don't think there's any industry that's not struggling to attract, retain, reskill, deploy people right now, right? I mean, it's across the board. So they're all, it's really applicable for all industries. And skills disruptions are there for every industry as well.
One last question, Kathy, because I think this is a great one, which is what is the secret recipe of change?
Well, it's so interesting. I wish there was one secret recipe. I mean, and I'd love to hear your perspective too, Andrea, but I think for me, if I want to boil all these 10 lessons and the change agility work and the whole playbook, and I put the link actually in the chat for everybody to get, it's free for everybody. If I would summarize all of that, is change is all about people, right? It's putting people first, really thinking about who you're changing for, and why you're changing, and why is this a good thing, and really starting with employees who need to eventually execute on that change. I think putting them first, I think that's, like, in a nutshell, the big, maybe it's not a secret, but I think the one word thing that I'd say.
100%. I agree with you 100%. Again, just putting yourself in the shoes of the individuals, what they're trying to do in their day-to-day work, and how this impacts them will lead you to success, for sure.
Well, this was a fantastic conversation. I loved all the questions. There were now a lot of questions. We didn't get to all of them, but thank you very much. And I think over to you, Emily.
Thank you for attending today's webinar. You may disconnect and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.